Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path, and what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? This week, we had the great pleasure of recording actually live and in person when I got to visit Vanessa in Austin, which was delightful. And we also had the chance to be together right after Vanessa's time on retreat with Matt Kahn. So, needless to say, we spent a lot of our time together like the geeks that we are, going over her notes. In this episode, we went over a portion of her notes that we found particularly resonant, and we're talking about not knowing, and how and why I don't know is a powerful, clear, open, and relieving position to come from. P.S. Side note, we have Matt Kahn booked to come on the show in June, so we're very much looking forward to that. If you're enjoying the show, you can leave a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page. You can head to blissandgrit.com to subscribe for our weekly Friday digest, or you can become a supporting member at patreon.com/blissandgrit. Last thing, we swear sometimes, so you might want to wear headphones or think about the company you're in. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Brooke.
Hello, Vanessa.
Well, everyone, we're doing things a bit different today, so this ought to be interesting. Brooke is actually sitting with me in my fancy recording studio in Austin, Texas.
We're very fancy people. It's exciting to be real and in person when we record.
So you also may notice a difference in the sound quality, so that's what's up. I don't know if it'll be better or worse. So here we go. Okay, so I am fresh off of retreat with Matt Kahn, and Brooke and I basically spent the weekend like dorks reading through all of my notes so we can talk about and process and download and share and bond over and connect on all the beautiful teachings and shifts that I experienced and then that Brooke experienced being a part of that. And we thought that there was something really juicy that we could talk about today that I'm just going to read to you. So I'm going to share some notes that I took at this retreat with Matt Kahn in Portland a week or so ago. And just to note, it's a bit of paraphrasing. So I'm going to read you some things that came up and we'll see where we go from there. Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Here we go. Most brains are addicted to the seeking and processing of information. I don't know is the deconstruction of your human conditioning. You don't wake up out of yourself. You wake up out of the fantasy that you know yourself. A break from what you think you know about yourself is the solution to any problem. All the things you think you know about yourself are actually the building blocks to having a personal problem with yourself. To know is in time and is born of imagination, since you actually are always changing. So what if the clearest view is no view in particular? You just see what you see and you put nothing on it. Ultimately, a view is a reference point. Life doesn't need you to know anything because life is not separate than you. You're trying to know something about life or yourself because you think that there is something other than life, meaning you are other than life. Why keep track of your story at all? So, shall we begin to talk about the power and beauty of the words, I don't know.
It is one of my very favorite mantras, as I've mentioned before on the show. And I'll just sort of out myself that generally, but in particular with Matt Kahn's work, it's like I need to take it a few words at a time and then actually let it permeate me, like meaning that I can feel it or experience it or get some kind of like aha, which I don't get, with every sentence, but it's a slower conversation. It's a slower way of knowing, because otherwise we're having a conversation about knowing how to not know, which is a weird place to be and not particularly useful. So that said, for me, I'm going to be repeating some of what you said, like some of the sentences, and how they strike me. But maybe one of the things that we can do as like a container is how this relates to the way we make ourselves into fixed and solid objects. And one of the sentences that comes up for me is like, what if the clearest view is no view in particular? See what you see and put nothing on it. A view is a reference point. So to have a reference point is a way of fixing ourselves and the world in time, but also with solid identities. And for me, like one of the things that's so relieving about this to me is so much of the journey, like for me, there's been a lot of, the initial point in was therapy, which I think it is for a lot of us, or, personal growth type work, or in my case, trauma healing. And there's a way that it feels useful and also safe to keep understanding things about myself. So to go, oh, I'm the kind of person who, or I've experienced these things and these things have shaped me in these ways. And that means that I am always going to, and I feel like there was a long period of time where that was really, really useful. It really served. Like I was trying to discern, I was trying to have some clarity, but ultimately I was also just trying to make myself safe by being fixed with these ideas of like, oh, that means that I'm the kind of person who. But the problem with that is that as soon as I do that, I make myself an object, a certain kind of an object, and it holds it in place. So we did an episode not too long ago about suffering, and I talked about the fact that I'm the kind of person who's wired towards suffering and that I can make an identity out of suffering. So like in one way that's freeing because it's like, oh, I see this layer of myself. But another way, it's a way the ego gets like little tricky, little subtle and holds it in place. Ah, yes.
I am the one who.
I am the one who. Ah, ha, ha. Like I'm onto my game. So that means that. And it becomes a way of actually solidifying that and making that pattern or allowing that pattern to keep repeating. So I don't know.
Well, what I was thinking of when you were talking is, okay, so holding all concepts lightly. It's not that knowing is a problem, so we don't have to turn knowing into a problem. But what happens is the mechanism that's seeking to know is often operating out of an idea that there is a problem to solve about us or someone else, right? So either someone else is a problem or we are a problem, and it's seeking to know or understand so that it can solve this problem that is them, or it can solve this problem that is us. So when knowing drops into your being from an experiential state, we know, wonderful. But that's not, I think, what he was getting at. I think he kept talking about the mechanism that's seeking to know in order to like create ground that feels safe. Because once I understand who I am and what the problems are with me, I can fix me, and then I can get all the things I want in life and be safe and be happy. Or once I understand the problem about that person, I can fix them. And then I can get all the things in life that, that I need to make me happy. And he said at a different point, understanding is our most primal way of controlling. So a couple of things I think can show up when we're talking about the power of I don't know, and conversely, the tendency to try to know. One is, where is it like arising from? Usually when I'm seeking to try to understand something, it's because I'm scared or I'm unsafe. I want to get things back under my purview. I want to know how to put them in boxes. I want to categorize them, or I want to fix them. And all of that is usually born out of my ego structure and survival mechanism. And my ego structure and survival mechanism tends to only be able to assign meaning based on what it's already experienced or witnessed. Right? So the way that the survival aspect of your brain works, and this is neuroscience, but it's also very experiential, is it projects what it knows from the past onto your present and future. So most of the time, if I'm operating from the level of my ego structure and I'm trying to know something because I have to know something because it'll make me feel better, or it'll change my life, or it'll make my relationship better, or whatever it is, I'm usually coming from the level of my ego survival structure. And then I'm trying to apply meaning or create a reference point or a view, but it's based on only what I've already been through or witnessed. And that's usually a bunch of inherited gobbledygook. So I think, when you start to look at, okay, so what's the actual dilemma if we get nuanced? It's like, well, what's the intentionality you approach this whole conversation of knowing? And B, like, what energy is it coming from? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from control? Is it coming from the solidification of a problem that you could then solve? And B, we imagine that if we really seek to, we can know, right? Like, we imagine, especially if we look at ourselves, that, or anyone else, like any human being, or even any being, any sentient being, we imagine that we can see through our conceptual filters and know them.
Right. And that's totally the like mega uber blind spot that we're stuck under, is like, we think we're dealing with a neutral ground, and that we are neutral ground. And then we can know about the world out there. We can know in a very like clean, unattached way about ourselves if we're coming from the level of ego, the level of thinking mind. Like you said, there actually, it's worth pointing out that there is such a thing as something, landing, which is more of the like, like a sudden disruption.
Like, of course,
right.
I learned that from here. Or, of course, in my discernment, this is that.
Right. Or like, a very simple example that I think we've all been through is like, maybe we met someone, a new boss or a friend of a friend or whatever, first meeting of a person, and we had a bunch of conceptual filters in advance of how it was going to go. Like, well, they're a friend of my friend, so of course I'm going to like them, or I hope I like them, or whatever the filters are. And maybe we bump up against, when the meeting actually happens, an experience of, I don't like that. Like, I just viscerally like, just can't, the conversation is stilted and I just don't feel good around this person. Just, it's not a match. Then that is a disrupt. And it's like, what we do oftentimes is we keep running our conceptual filter. Like, no, I'm sure it's fine. We kind of override our direct knowing. And then there's the moment of like, allowing ourselves to have whatever our actual knowing was. Like, oh yeah, right. No, I knew that. I felt that all along. So that's like a landing of a awareness. Maybe we could say some awareness that we had that landed in us, which is completely different. And I just want to circle back to what you were saying about time, and to requote Matt. Where was it? To know is in time and is born of imagination. So born of imagination, like in that example, it's like the idea of how this meeting is going to go. Or like you're saying, we have all of these filters based on our past experiences, what we were told we are, what we were told the world is. And so we're just holding in place the things that are causing us to suffer in the first place.
Well, what's funny about the example you gave is, so let's say you meet that person, you get triggered by them, so you experience something in your body and relationship. You don't even know if it has to do with them per se.
Right, exactly.
That you don't even know, because it's like, well, maybe, the way my survival system works, like on a basic level, is it goes, how familiar is this to something I've been through in my past? And if it feels familiar enough for whatever reason that the mind assigned it as familiar, maybe I'm meeting a plenty fine person, but I'm like, that person is dangerous. Like I feel really scared around them. And, I remember going through this when I was in an acupuncture clinic at Pacific College. There was a woman who had been really traumatized by a man with a beard. And then one of my colleagues, who was the sweetest man, had a beard. And she could not be treated by him. She could not see past like the alarm bells that were rising every time she was around this guy. But what she could know was, there's a trigger in my body. Right. Something is activated. And then before she even knows what the trigger, like why is this activation occurring of this feeling in my body, she could go, well, what is the feeling? Okay, it's anxiety. Okay, anxiety. How can I meet you? She can get curious about the anxiety. And it may turn out like, oh, in my discernment, no thanks to this person. Or it may turn out, holy crap, that guy reminds me of something that's still really hurty inside, right? So even that is so funny, because we assume that it's our body. So everything that arises in my body, I have purview on and I know. Sure. And even that can be an interesting mystery.
So maybe addressing some of what I think comes up for most people, what comes up for me for sure, because there's a way that surrendering into not knowing can be, and Amodama talked about this a lot in our lovely conversation with her, it can actually be so liberating and so deeply intimate. Like the relationship with life, with whatever's happening in your life, becomes so much more alive and available and intimate, because you're not holding things in place with your concepts, your filters, all of the stuff, from your past that just gets projected onto the present moment. But I think that since we have, most of us, a limited number of those experiences, what the ego feels when it talks about this kind of surrender is some of the things that can come up. Some of the trickiness is like hopeless, helpless, confused, like, oh, and of course the ego moves very quickly, in my experience, to make it into a concept like, okay, I'm not supposed to know anything. And then it starts making the I don't know identity, which is maybe the spacey person, or maybe it's the, I don't know, it's all good with God person, or like whatever it is. And then that's a person who's just kind of caught in a certain purgatory. There's like this fuzz around.
Yeah, then it can just become a spiritual identity, and you can ground in the I don't know as an identity rather as this alive process of curiosity.
Right. And I'm wondering for myself, like I'm doing this in real time. It's not because I'm like, I have the answers of how this goes, but like, what are some of the things we might be able to point to about when I don't know is letting go into a much more intimate and real and genuine relationship with life, where things can move however they want to move, instead of based on our projections of everything that's ever come before, versus when it's solidifying into a new identity. So like, I mean, for me, one of the things I would say is like, I can read these quotes or Matt's work or listen to some of his talks from a conceptual place. And if I'm feeling agitated, if I go to shame and blame of the self, like, oh, I've been trying to figure it out. I've been, shame on me. I just need to surrender. Why can't I surrender? And all those ideas about like that you can will your way into letting go of something, which is the ego perspective. Those are feelings that are very uncomfortable and disorienting, versus when they actually land in a way that's like, oh my God, it's so relieving. And what a relief to not have to know. And I think one of the things that gets in the way for me is like an experience of being safe in life. You know, that life itself is a safe place to be. That if I'm deeply intimate with it, because the ego jumps ahead and creates concepts and creates layers and knows things as a imaginary way of getting safety. You were saying, getting ground under the feet. So I guess I'm just wanting to like disrupt a little bit the tendency of all the ick that happens when we develop an identity around this. Like, I shouldn't be trying to know things. Whatever it is, or I'm the confused one, or I'm the spacey one, or versus like, how do we let it permeate?
Well, I think if we keep it close to ourself, right? Just close to, 'cause that was the example you gave. Like when I'm like, oh, I'm the worst. I'm trying to figure it out. I shouldn't be trying to figure it out. You know, all of that. If we keep it close to ourselves, one of the things Matt was pointing to is people don't have problems. Objects have problems. Right. So the ego's great at trying to fix an object that has a problem. Like my clock is broken, my car is broken, I should fix this, right? This is a problem. Oh, I run a business and the numbers are in, the red, and like, how do I solve this? But when it starts to come to us, as we try to turn ourselves into a problem to solve, there's already this objectification, as if there's two parts of us, like as if we're not whole. Never mind, like we're not even life. We're not even unified. There's that like problem seeking part of ourselves and then a part of ourselves that is a problem to seek. And we're constantly on the lookout for what am I doing wrong? So even when you hear, what if you could just rest in I don't know? It's like, I can't rest in I don't know. I'm a huge problem.
Right, I know, and life's a problem.
And as soon as we say that, we're already defining a knowing upon ourselves. So, I mean, the whole thing is funny. It's like what we're looking for, not that the words have any significance, but rather a loosening in our being of, what if I don't have to be a problem? What if I don't have to know everything? What if I can't know everything about myself? What if I already know everything I need to know about myself, and as I need to know more, it arises? Like, what if I don't have to go on the lookout for all of the ways that I am flawed or unsafe or unworthy, right? Which is, I think, really where this tends to kind of get us caught. So I guess I experienced relief around it in the same way probably that we talk about identities. I mean, all of us probably relate to at some point having a very constricting identity. So the identity that I'm the one who always feels unlovable. Now, I agree with you, Brooke. I wanted to circle back to saying, like, therapy was very helpful to me, and understanding my narrative was helpful. Like, oh, this had me feeling this way, and this had me feeling this way. And when they did this to me, I developed a belief that, and, if you look at attachment theory, understanding your life and your story and like kind of what happened to you as a being is considered healthy and very helpful. And even as we're talking now, like understanding, when I was around my mother and she was bathing in anxiety, I kind of just picked up that habit. Like things can be very useful. Where it can become tricky is then we can concretize ourselves into the one who always. And I think that's what he was saying about time. It's like, you're always changing and you're unpredictable and you're mysterious. So like, let's say, for example, with relationships, since love is always such a like sweet, tender spot for so many of us, it's like, I'm the one who always chooses bad people. Right. And then that can start to become an identity where we're a problem and we have this problem that is this habit. And then we can start to like kind of cram ourselves into boxes. And then there's no freedom for me to change on a dime. I mean, like one of the things I found really relieving, one of the reasons why I like Matt as a teacher is I grew up and I had this story that I was the one who was unlovable and weird and burdensome, therefore a problem. Right. And I had this problem identity. And that seems like something you have to spend quite a long time chipping away at and like unhooking and like loosening and then meeting with love and, quite a process, right? Because it's me. So if it's me and it's so solid, it's in my body, that's how it felt. And then I went to Matt's retreat in January, and out of the blue, this part of myself that was committed to making myself into this solid problem in all of its innocence, just that's how the ego mechanism works, went away overnight. So it felt, right? Who knows what actually made that happen? So that's part of what's really relieving, is to recognize in all awe and wonder that we're not what we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like the other line that I loved was something we didn't read yet, which is, when we're taught to speak, we're told how to see the world. That is really crazy. If you slow down and realize, like, your culture, your parents, your friends, your schoolmates, your religion, like everything you've been exposed to told you who you were, how to conceptualize of things, what was safe and unsafe, what was good and bad, what was right and wrong, and you then have that in your ego mechanism. I mean, that's what it's built upon. It's how to stay safe, how to be good, all of those kind of ideas that are born in dualism. So when we're trying to assess ourselves as problems, or when we're coming through the survival mechanism to look at, why is this so ouchy? But we're looking through the lens of dualism, and there's a right and a wrong, and something is a problem here, like someone's a problem, it's me or them, and all of these different aspects that the ego just operates from as like a shortcut, because that's how the brain's like, it's easier. I don't want to have to assess every freaking situation. So it's good or bad, right or wrong, safe or unsafe, and it's built on concepts that people handed to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if I think about my parents handing me my concepts for life, I'm like, oh God, if I've been operating like assigning meaning all based on what they went through and how they see the world and what they understand about human life, well, yes, I have.
Yeah, and what was handed to them.
And what was handed to them.
And like the way that goes back and gets perpetuated. And I remember in January when you went up to ask Matt a question, it was such a great moment, because you went thinking, I'm going to ask a question about my health. But when you got up there, you were like, I wanted to ask you a question about my health, but I'm realizing that I can't find a problem with myself or with anything. And he was like, okay, so there's no problem. And you said something along the lines of, but will it come back? And I thought it was so great, because he was just like, there's no reason to expect that. And you realize how much is built on expectation, that these things, it's the horizontal mind that Emoda Ma talked about too, that all these teachers talk about. But in our most recent conversation with her, where you take from the past and you project into the future, take from the past, project it on the future. And it just keeps holding in place the same narrative that was handed to you by your parents and your culture, and that was handed to them by their parents and their culture and their peers. And it's like, if we actually want to disrupt it, we have to be willing to first see that our ego mind exists to make everything a problem. It's like, this was from another Matt Kahn talk, and I don't remember exactly what context he was using it, but he was talking about, it's kind of like playing, fetch with a dog. Like it wants to go fetch something. What's the problem here? Go fetch, and we keep giving it a, something to go fetch evidence of, right? So I'm the kind of person who's really wired to suffer over much. Go fetch, go show me the evidence.
I know
that that's true. And what if we can disrupt the, like you said, there's no reason to expect that. It was so freeing when he said that to you, like, oh my gosh, I do so much building things around what I expect. And the intimacy that Emoda Ma talked about, like that surrender, the open hand, the free fall, sounds so scary to the ego structure because, of course, its entire organization relies on not doing that, on going and fetching the problem born in separation. But to have experiences of it, like, oh my gosh, I don't have to expect that anything's going to keep being written the way it's always been written. And suddenly there's this circuit break and it's like, oh, and you can have a completely different experience of life. I mean, that's what that is like, this whole new world rushes in from there.
I know, because, okay, so it's like if the ego's there in its like role, it's like in its functionality for this body mind to be like, hey, are there any problems I should anticipate or solve or take care of in this moment? You know, like it's doing its thing. It's just trying to like do its thing. But then it was informed with all the crap and gunk from like other people's pain and misunderstandings. And so it basically goes, hey, how familiar is this to something I've been through in the past? And if it is, I know how to assign it into its category. You know, I don't know if this is true. I don't know what the ego is in the body, if it exists and like where it would, you know, occupy. But I think about, from neuroscience, there's something called the default mode network in the brain, right? And the default mode network is like, it's the self-referencing aspect of ourselves. That's always like, what is this? What does it mean about me? Am I safe? Am I good? Is it good? How will I succeed? You know, it's always self-referencing. And it sort of loops around itself. And they say it's not present. It only is bringing the past into the present or the future, right? So I'm like, this is just part of our brain structure. And I don't know why it's part of it. That's part of the mystery. But there it is. And then a lot of empathic, sensey people. Hello, shout out to all of you out there listening. I'm probably talking to most of you. Are like, usually when the ego's like, where's the problem? Something hurts, right? Because the ego basically, since it's your protector, is like, I want you to feel good, right? I don't want you to hurt. I want things to be pleasurable and convenient because that all signals safety and it all seems like what we need for health and well-being. So anytime something doesn't feel like that, even if it's a wonderful growing process, the ego says, how do I get you out of this? Like, where's the problem, right? But most sensey people go, where's the problem? I'm the problem.
Right. I'll show you the problem.
And then it lists all the reasons why you're a problem. Like, you ever ask someone like, well, like, what do you know to be true about yourself? And it's like, well, you know, and it's like, maybe they'll throw in one good thing about themselves for good measure, because we all are smart enough to know we should like something about ourselves. That's pretty healthy. But most of the time, if you really think about like, what do you know to be true about yourself? A lot of it will either be externally oriented, like I'm nice to people, or like, you know, I'm good at my job, or it'll be all the ways that we're screwed up, right? Because that's part of how identity gets built and passed down from generations to generations. And so I think that's really where the interesting part comes in. It's like, what if just for 10 minutes, like what if when everyone was done listening to this podcast and when we were done talking, just for 10 minutes, you didn't have to know anything about yourself. You didn't have to be the person you think you are. And you didn't have to be influenced by everything you've ever been through. Like, just what if for 5 minutes, like as an experiment, try it on. What would it be like? What if you can be an alive, ever-changing mystery? What if your partner could be that? What if your child could be that? You know, what if your mother and father could be that? Like, for 5 minutes, just try it on for size. And there is this tremendous amount of like, for me, and maybe somehow when Matt's saying it, it's like, I don't know, it's a magical transmission that's like coming through. But for me, whenever I get it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm. I could take a time out.
Yeah, right. From like needing to go fetch the problem in me.
And coming back others. With me in my own mouth.
Right, exactly. You're the problem again and let me show you how. Yeah. I mean, I'd kind of like to actually answer the rhetorical question he asks. Why keep track of your story at all? Because I can watch how my ego has a lot of great answers to that question.
Of why you should keep track of my story.
You should keep track of your story because, it keeps you safe. You won't repeat your same mistakes again. You'll understand why you're doing things. Maybe you can make a better goal and then achieve that goal, and then your needs will be met, and then you'll be happy because you won't be doing the same story. But when I go deeper than that kind of quick moving thought pattern of like, I'll tell you why you need to keep track of your story, which is what I've always done. That's always what's run. It's like, why keep track of your story at all? And then I can hear those answers that I just gave. And it's like, is that true? Like, does keeping track of my story keep me safe? Like, so for example, I can think about choosing a bad partner, having a really bad experience there, right? And it's like, do I need to keep track of? And then, of course, that is not just one story. Like, remember that one time you had a really bad boyfriend? It's not a story. It's a multitude of stories about why that happened, what happened to me before to make that happen, what's wrong with that person over there to make it happen, and all of those multitude of things. And it's like, is it really true that I need to keep track of that story for it to not happen again? Or if I'm really not keeping track of my story and I'm not needing to know things and I'm not needing to fetch the problem, and so I'm really deeply intimate with life, if I meet someone and we're flirting, what held that in place? Like, what allowed, let's say, the Velcro mesh to attach to one another in the first place, in my example, in a really bad partnership? It was all the belief systems I had about myself in the first place. I'm unlovable. Oh my God, I can't believe this magical person with this big persona is paying attention to me. I never thought I would find love again, but here it is. Better grab onto this one and hold on, because if this doesn't work, nothing will ever work. It's like the only thing that Velcroed a bad partnership and held it in place as an experience were keeping track of my story. If I don't keep track of my story, it's just a very simple, do I like this? Yes, no. And the answer in real time was almost always no. So there's no Velcro. Then suddenly the Velcro little teeth go smooth and it's like, oh, well, I just move away from that. That's intimacy with life. So the ego thinks I need to keep track of my story so I don't repeat my mistakes. So I don't, so I stay safe, so I don't get hurt. But the only things that held that in place in the first place were keeping track of my story.
I mean, the whole thing is such a trip. And our ego is trying to grab onto it and understand this. Like, right, I'm going to master this. Right. And then I'm going to understand how not to know by knowing how not to know, right? So please, everything is just like a simple grain of salt. It's like just what arises when you imagine this or sit with this or like hear the words, right? Because it's so funny, because the problem is, as long as we are, let's see, what would the right way of saying this, if I could get a best way of saying this? As long as we're seeing the world through the eyes of the ego, we can't let go of knowing. Mm-hmm. We can't, because that's the whole ego's job. So the ego's job is something's a problem, someone's a problem. Someone's a problem. Let's say it like that. Someone's a problem here. Who is it? Who should I assign blame to? Oh, I don't feel comfortable assigning it to them, but I'm going to. Oh, that's feeling guilty. So now it's me. And then it's like, oh, I'm feeling so tired of hating myself. It's probably them, right? And like, that's just what happens when we see the world through the eyes of the ego, when we hear through the ears of the survival system that is built on concepts that are intergenerationally passed down to us and that have occurred to us over the course of our own lives, surely. So the dilemma is the ego can't let go of knowing. So that's not where this is going to land. It's when the soul, as Matt would call it, La Kelly, who we'll be interviewing soon, would call it awake awareness. Judith would call it fundamental consciousness, right? So there's many different words, but when I'm going to use soul since we're talking about Matt Kahn's teachings in this moment, when you see through the eyes of the soul. So it's like a perspective shift. It's like shifting dimensions, as we've said, or shifting to a different vantage point, because the ego can only see in binary. So that was something that Matt was talking about, is that if you look at the way the ego operates, like that operating system works, is everything is seen in binary, in dualism. So if you think about the default mode network of the brain, or whatever part of us, I don't know what it is, but the way the default mode network works is the reason why it reduces things to binary is for quick shortcut decisions. So you don't always have to use glucose for every decision you make, right? So it's like saving resources. So who knows? Maybe that's why the ego structure works the way it does. But what the ego structure does is it tries to reduce things to its most simple variants. Is it good, bad? Am I right or wrong? Is it safe or unsafe? And it doesn't hold things in this large container of insight. So as long as we're seeing the world from a state of survival, fear is often an indicator we're, caught in it. Unless there's a threat in the immediate moment, then fear is an important signal. Blame, hate, self-judgment, these kinds of things can be our little indicators. When we're seeing through that, we're always going to try to know. That's okay. It's like in all innocence, it's just the operating system. So it's almost like in order to soften into not knowing, which sometimes just happens and like lands, is because you're able to see through the eyes. You're able to hear through the ears, experience life through the consciousness that we could call the soul. Call it whatever you want, right? Fill in the blank. And you and I have experienced that. It's like I can be in heaven and hell, like in a 5-minute span, where like at one point everything is like bad. It's like, okay, I think I told this story once before, but it's just interesting because I went to see this chiropractor. It's a NUCA chiropractor. And what NUCA chiropractors do is they adjust your atlas. And that has a profound effect on your nervous system. And I'm so sensitive. I have such high levels of interoception right now. And I know what it feels like to be grounded in peace. And I know what it feels like when I'm caught in divided mind, right? So the guy's working on me, and apparently he was working the wrong side. And what was happening was my nervous system was cranked. And as my nervous system was cranked, I start to move into survival, and my brain starts to spit out some thoughts like, I'll never get better. I'm the one. I know I'll never get better. I'm the one, right? I'll never get better. Everything costs so much money. This is the worst. I'm the worst. What a damn bit of luck to have this body, right? Like it's just spitting out things as if they're statements of truth, as if I know this about myself, and as if it'll never change, right? And this is all while he's working on the wrong side, and I'm getting crankier and crankier. And then finally I tell him, like, I'm getting super cranky. And he's like, me too. And he's like, you know what? I think I'm working on the wrong side. Flips me over, works on the correct side. Spontaneous movement of my atlas occurs. My nervous system goes, and I'm like laughing. And I'm like, everything is beautiful. And I'm beautiful. And you're beautiful. And life is, all of a sudden, I had this different vantage point where I can see things through the eyes of love, and I can hear them through the ears of truth. And like I can bring heart-centered consciousness into relationship with the mind, right? So all of these things could begin to shift. So I think the problem is when we're like, fine, how do I not know anything about myself? Now, right. To be a good spiritual person, I need to not know anything about myself. Usually we're coming from that level of consciousness that's not capable. Right. Of not knowing.
Let go of the problem. Ready? Go.
I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it. So, it's almost like how we can shift into states of love, states of compassion, states of like openness, softness, tenderness. Matt's entry point on some levels begins with curiosity. Like, well, if I don't, it's like almost like the Byron Katie stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Byron Katie is like the master of like, you don't know, right? Like whatever you're thinking, you think is a fact. But if you apply the 4 questions and like is this true? And is this really true? And is there anything else that can be true? As you start to apply that, you realize, well, maybe it's not as true as I think it is. And that starts to create like a and a softness, right? Well, then Matt would go one step farther. So there's this like great curiosity of like, is this a fact? Am I under threat? Am I a problem? Like, are these things facts? Then you can start to see, well, what arises? And then you can start to meet that with this like loving space, which shifts you into a consciousness of your soul. Mm-hmm. So then you can be like, oh my God, that's so fun to play with. What if I don't know? What if it's not as solid as I think? And then I think we can get more play with this.
Yeah, it loosens up the soil a bit. And I, as you know, sitting next to you, but I'll say it for the other people listening, like as I've been here, I'm going through all this home buying stuff, like house that I was going to buy and then it fell through and blah, blah, blah. And like this can be super agitating to a nervous system, really revs up the old, safety survival stuff. And then we went through, we're not going to go through it here right now, but we went through one of the exercises together in a park of like inquiry, uncovering what are the different layers of belief that are operating. At a certain point, things shifted. And it's literally, I felt like, I said to Vanessa, I feel like I just recovered from the flu. Like suddenly I have way more energy, not in a manic way, but just like when you're finally crawling out of bed after you've had a fever for 3 days and like, the light feels so good on my skin and I can see the leaves of the trees. And, these are the markers that you've shifted into a different state of being. And, the shift the other way will come too. So again, it's like in innocence, we can just noticing that there are different states is such a beginning towards more freedom. And then we can have inquiry. And if there are moments, and certainly there are, where I'm in a very compacted, very triggered state and I can feel it because I feel dense in my body. I'm feeling negative emotions. My thoughts are racing. It's filled with belief systems about the problem out there and for sure the problem with me. Honestly, moving towards just any kind of softening, like when it's really amped. And we've said this before, but like find safety, find relaxation. And, it's like we recorded an episode, Spiritual Path is not a benzo. And people can do this, right? Where it's like, I'm just going to turn towards the light or I'm just going to chill out. This is different. Like when your animal self has hijacked your nervous system and you're amped, please do find rest or safety. And don't give yourself an assignment like means I need to meditate. I don't want to meditate. Like whatever it is, nap, lay in the sun, go to a restorative yoga class, get a craniosacral session, whatever it is, find rest. And I know we've said that a million times, but I think it bears repeating because then instead of when it occurs, we just make the problem more solid because it's like, I'm having the problem again. What's wrong with me? We can go, okay, like that's what's happening now. How do I find some tenderness, some softness? Because the way that new perspectives are going to arise is only from a nervous system that's capable of shifting states.
Well, I think you can't also underestimate, not that you are, but one can't underestimate the power of approaching yourself with genuine openness and compassion and respect. Like it occurred to me, what I was getting the image of when you were talking is when I first was learning a little bit of muscle testing. I only learned a little bit of muscle testing, P.S. So when I learned a little bit of muscle testing, the woman who was teaching us was saying how important it is that when you approach the person's body to do testing on them, you hold the mantra of, I don't know. Mm. And like, I feel like that's a very respectful way to meet a human. Mm-hmm. Like I may have some discernments, and especially the longer I spend time with them, I may have some discernments that say, hey, it seems like they have this pattern active in them. And a lot of people who are listening, you all are so sensitive. You probably can see some things. But there's also ways that we just cast assumptions on people based on something that triggers us, which means something that we've been through in our life or something we've already experienced. So it's like this really nice, respectful way, especially when we're meeting a client or meeting someone for the first time, to like be like, what if I didn't know everything about this person already? Then what would it be like? And I'm not saying that that's what we should only do. I'm super not. I'm just saying, isn't that nice to imagine someone met you without preconceptions? Like, who is this being sitting in front of me?
I don't know.
I don't know. That would be so lovely, right? And well, the same with ourselves. Like, it's so respectful to meet one's experience with, hey, honey, who are you? What's happening? I don't have to know everything about you. You can speak to me, right? It's this like super open way. So, if you're in that state where you're like, oh crap, my ego's calling all the shots. Literally, I'm in survival instinct 24/7 right now. You can slow down and be like, just start with something simple. Like, well, what am I feeling in my body? Oh, I'm feeling tension. If I was to give an emotion to that tension, how would I describe it? If I gave it an adjective, if it's a feeling, what would I say? Oh, it feels like anxiety. I was going through something like this the other day. I was feeling unincluded, which is one of my deep triggers. It's one of the pains I've experienced, being alone, abandoned, unincluded, right? And it was like, okay, well, what am I feeling? And so instead of being like, okay, here's what I could have been like. Well, my husband didn't invite me to da-da-da-da-da. So the problem is that he doesn't include me in anything, right? And I could have known and solidified it. But what was really sweet was when I approached myself, it was like, oh, I'm having this feeling. And when I sat with that feeling, I'm like, where's this coming from? Like, when have I experienced this in my life? And then it was like, oh my God, my mom has so much trauma around not being included. And like, oh my God, my sister has that. And oh my God, that goes all the way back. And then it was like, kind of this discovery. It was like a beautiful discovery. And the interesting thing that happens is because you're meeting that experience with this respectful, open place, you actually can't be in your ego to do that. So it requires almost a shift into this other aspect. John Prendergast would be like, what does your heart know? Mm-hmm. Matt may say your soul. Right? So, but it's this other aspect almost has to come to the foreground in order for you to have a gentle, open inquiry that doesn't know. And that comes with tenderness. And so then I could all of a sudden see things fresh and have this whole trickle down. And I think then you can have movement, you can have release. Actually, no one needed to be blamed or made a problem because in that circumstance, no one was a problem. There really was just pain that needed to be met. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you can see how the same exact inquiry could go a couple different ways from the ego's perspective. It could solidify it, right? Like, oh yeah, I have this pattern and so does my mom. My mom passed it on to me. Oh, I'm stuck with this thing, like this is how this goes in my family. Yeah. But like you said, when you are able to shift states, when there's tenderness and like an affectionate curiosity, something else starts to happen. It just starts to dissolve. And it's like, oh, it's just much more simple. Like, oh, okay. It's not like holding it in place. And then things start to move. But I think for people listening, like what you said earlier in the episode is just the worthy exploration. Can you, for 5 minutes, just get really curious and, don't put yourself on a timer when you're in a really agitated state. But if there's some capacity for openness and ease in your system at any given point, like, can you just spend 5 minutes not knowing you or your story or your problems, or meeting your partner or your child or your parent, and just for 5 minutes, like, I don't know.
Yeah, try it on and see if it loosens anything up. I mean, you don't have to ignore the aspects of your life that aren't working. You don't have to ignore the aspects of life around you that aren't working. What it's an experiment in is, what if I didn't have to be a problem? What if they didn't have to be a problem? What if I don't have to be an object that's solid and never changing? What if they don't have to be an object that's solid or never changing? If I could see through that, like lens, if I could look at it through that, what might it open up? What might it shake loose? What might be freed?
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any of the resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Our supporting member platform is at patreon.com/blissandgrit, where you can donate to the show for a small monthly amount, and you get rewards for your support. If you're wanting to engage with us or these topics in a deeper way, that is the place to go. And you can also, of course, play with us on Instagram and Facebook. We're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support you've provided, and for all the notes you send. We'll be back next week.